Um, I'm one of the first batch of Tibetan lamas who studied English. When I was 8 years old, we were in this Tulkus school called Young Lamas Home School in Dalhousie. Chujini Rinpoche and Chomyi Rinpoche were also there. We were kind of children playing together. And so I was translating from the age of 10, although I didn't know any English. Because of the situation, nobody in our community spoke any other language. So I was the first in my family and also in many kind of communities who could speak a little bit of English and later on a little bit of Hindi or Nepali or things like that. So sometimes I boast and say that I taught my mother how to cook because all the things, food that was there in India, she didn't know anything about, so she didn't know how to cook. So sometimes I will meet people and ask them, how do you cook this or that? And then I'll try to tell my mother, and then mother sometimes tries and works, sometimes doesn't work, sometimes she doesn't even want to listen to me. And the translation is, I think, not a very easy job. Please come. Because every language has a different way of, has a different characteristic. What you want to say in one language, if you just put the words together and put it in the another language, it sounds very funny. So like what I'm telling you now in English, if I want to say the same thing in Tibetan, I would say in a totally different way, because the language of Tibet and language of English are quite different in their way of expressing things. That's why translation becomes difficult, because it's not just the words you have to put together and present, but the meaning that we have to present together. And then all the kind of, the feeling and nuances, So therefore, it's not easy. That's why in one book I've read, there's a book, small book, I found. It's called the Book of Tea. I don't know if any of you have read that book. And there it is said, there is one sentence about translation in that book. It said that translation at its best is like the other side of the brocade. there's all the, there's all the thread, but no design. So therefore, a very good translation should not be like that. You should be able to not only have the words and meaning, but also the feelings and expressions and things like that. So that is very difficult. That's very difficult. I was a little bit reading translations of Tibetan Dharma books since very early age, in 60s and 70s, and and every time I was reading a book that was translated from Tibetan into English, because I didn't know any other language, I felt sad. I felt sad and most of the time frustrated, because I thought, this is not what it is about. You can't totally say it's totally wrong, because it's kind of there, but it doesn't say it. So therefore, frankly, I didn't read much of those translations. And their translation is, even now, I think sometimes I feel that, especially, of course, now the translation has improved so much, since kind of 90s, translation into English from Tibetan has so much improved. And sometimes it's better to read in English to understand the meaning than in Tibetan. Yeah, it's a little bit like that. But sometimes, like the sadhanas especially, prayers and things like that, then it's a little bit difficult. If I read in Tibetan, I can be inspired. I can feel, kind of inspired and feel kind of it touches something in my heart. But if I read it in English, although it says kind of same thing, maybe because I'm not English speaking, I'm not an English mother tongue speaking, and therefore maybe I don't understand. It doesn't do anything like that. It doesn't, very seldom it touches my heart. And therefore, a few times I tried. I thought, this is not right. It must be something that would kind of inspire me and touch me, because prayers and sadhanas are like that. It has to touch yourself. It has to, do something to your heart. And I said, I must try to make it better. I tried. It's much worse. It doesn't become better. It becomes even worse. Lately, I compiled a kind of practice book for my centers. And beginning, I thought I would, try to translate, because I took all translations, many of all translations, and said, I should fix them and make it very inspiring. After trying 5 times, 10 times, it's much worse. So I give up and say, okay, now I have to give up. I have to select some old translations and put them together. It's like that, it's like that. And I think there's still space for improvement. The main thing is, I think, because when you, in a translation, there are two things. One is the language from which you are translating. And then the other is the language in which you are trying to translate. So the translator has to be very, very kind of very good in the language that the original language from which you are going to translate, source language. There, it's not only the language, not only the grammar and the vocabulary and things like that, but also the subject. A few times I tried, I was traveling in different parts of Europe, and there, different, every little distance, there's a new country, another country, and another language, and things like that. So you need to be translated. And a few times I had professional translators. And the professional translators was the worst because they were very good in their language, but they didn't understand the subject, so therefore they couldn't translate at all. It was so therefore you need to really understand deeply the subject that you are going to translate. So if you don't understand the subject very well and really completely, then the translation becomes, there are people who do translate. Most of the academic translations in earlier years, maybe even now sometimes, is those kind of things, they just translated through dictionary and things like that, just the words, and then the translation reads in English like Tibetan, and then you don't understand anything, I was once asked to teach a text which was translated into English. And I tried to teach, and I can't understand myself. And then, and then I have to explain, and then, in I think the course was for 3 weeks or something like that. And I could cover only like few pages because next year there was a new translation. And we just went through the new translation, and the whole book was covered in 3 weeks. It's that, it's the difference of how good a translation is like that, like if you really understand the subject, and then you have, of course, mastery over the target language. Sometimes we think that if I am kind of English-speaking person, mother tongue English, then I can study a little bit Tibetan, and then I can translate very well. But, I think it's not so. You have to be very good in writing or whatever in the target language. You really have to have some kind of not only knowledge, but some kind of a talent. The more you have that, the better translation becomes. And the translation is, of course, a science kind of. It's a very technical, it's very objective thing. But it's also very artistic because it has to be very, there are so many small kind of, how you say it in a certain way, little bit changes makes lots of difference. Yeah. Actually, we see this in the Tibetan translations also from Sanskrit. Although, because of the great first set of translators, Lotsawas, the translation into Sanskrit, into Tibetan from Sanskrit, later on become very easy because they made a word for each Sanskrit word. We almost have a Tibetan word for almost every Sanskrit word. They made it like that. I think this is possible only in Tibetan language. Because that's every language has different capacities, characteristics. The Tibetan language has a kind of natural capacity to make new words. They can make new words very easily. For instance, after 59, nowadays, when we first came here, first few decades, when you listen to radio or television, there was not much television, but radio, there was a lot, news and things like that in Tibetan. There were almost every kind of a scientific or every kind of modern words, they had to say it in that language or English or something like that. There was no Tibetan language. But now, after, for the last few decades, now when you hear a kind of a radio or television or whatever discussion in Tibetan, in science or in technology or anything, you don't need almost no English word. You can say everything in Tibetan because they made new words. And these new words, if you make a new word, it's not like it's a new word and now you have to introduce to everybody and this new word means this and then everybody has, it's not like that. A new word comes and we can almost understand what is new word meaning if you understood the little bit about the subject. That's the Tibetan kind of language's capacity. So they use this capacity very well when they translated the Dharma into Tibetan. And they formed so many new words. And sometimes I think some of the words that they use in Tibetan, some of the Dharma words, are even better than Sanskrit. Like there are many like that. Even very simple words like, kunchosum, kunchok. In Sanskrit, it's a ratna, three ratna. Ratna means precious, precious jewel. Actually, it's the gold is ratna. Things like that. So, three ratna can mean just three gold, silver, and something like that, But the Tibetans translated it into Kunchuk. Kunchuk, as you know, means Kun means rare, and Chok means kind of best, supremely rare. It could mean a very precious thing also, but when you say Kunchuk, it can mean only Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So that word can mean only that. So then when you say Kunchuk, it has a specific, not like Ratna, which has many meanings. There are several of these kind of things, So therefore, there's this kind of, that's why I'm saying is that what I'm trying to say is the Tibetan language is formed in such a way, the classical Tibetan, you can say Tibetan language or classical Tibetan language, that it is so easy to translate from Sanskrit. That's why I think, it is also possible to reconstruct this original Sanskrit from Tibetan. They've done it because many of the sutras and tantras and many texts in Sanskrit is lost. The original text is lost, and they have only Tibetan. And there is, if we try to reconstruct back into Sanskrit, it is not only possible, but it is easy. Many people did this. Now they're slowly doing it, actually, reconstruct whole of Ganju Tenju in Sanskrit. There is one incident quite a few years ago. Some people in Varanasi tried to reconstruct a small tantra that was only in Tibetan, or they couldn't find other than in Tibetan. And then they tried to put it back into Sanskrit, and it was published. After a few years, they found the original Sanskrit text in Nepal. In Nepal is a very special place for the Buddhist studies, because Nepal was never conquered by, never attacked by a kind of, in the way they attacked India and things like that. So therefore, things have lost, things have kind of decayed and things like that, but, it's just there. Sometimes you can find some very old things and very ancient things. So they found an original text of that particular Sanskrit version, and they compared. And to the surprise of everybody, they only found two differences. And that's, almost impossible in any other language, But even there, the translations done by different translators in Tibet or in Tibetan are very different. Some of the translations, like Baidrosana and Kagyu Order, and some of the translators, when you read it, you read it as if it's written in Tibetan. It's so clear. It's, it's, some of them can be, of course, very high and, deep and profound, but it's like as if it's written originally in Tibet. And some other translations, if you read them, you can't understand them, even by Tibetans, unless there is a commentary. That's how how depending on how good the translator is. There's a kind of a very traditional example. But this is, of course, quite a Vajrayana translation, but maybe some of you have heard this, that in the Tantras, in Sanskrit, there was this like arakta. Arakta means blood. A means a negative. So no blood. And now how to translate that? So one translator was confronted this, and then he was a little bit baffled and tried to look in all the translations of the olden times, and they found that it was translated as machak, michak, chakpame. How many of you are studying Tibetan here? So quite a few, yeah? Did you hear this story? Now, rakta, it's one meaning is blood, but in Sanskrit and especially in the Tantras, there are many different levels of meanings, Many Tantras, each sentence or each stanza usually has 4 different meanings. So then to translate that in that way is almost impossible in any other language. So arakta, it's same, like no blood. But then the translator translated, the great translator in the past translated that machak, michak, chapame, it's the blood they translate as attachment. And then they, instead of, just they used the, negative in 3 tense. Machak is the past, Mechak, future, Chapame, present, not attached, will not be attached, and is not attached, kind of, So this way, when you can totally understand the meaning, and then also understand the target language in this way, then it is very, it becomes something totally different. So therefore, the translations now is, I think for the Dharma, this is a golden age for the translation. I think this is really the golden age for translation into English, especially, but into other foreign languages. So many different translations are going on, projects. You all know the 84,000. I really appreciate this, the way they are doing it. Because other translations, there are many other translations going on. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but sometimes the translators are a little bit stubborn and a little bit also proud, Each translator uses their own terminologies and then doesn't want to listen to anybody, but this is the way it is. There's a little bit like that also. And then so therefore every translator has their own thing and they don't want to work together with anybody. And then so you have to just let them be, There was a little bit of that. But what this 84,000 did was that there's a translation and there's, editing, many different levels of editing. And that's really what I appreciated so much because I work a little bit with different translators. I was working with Tsanda, Tsanda, and Tsanda did lots of work and very good work. They did the Shechanzu. Shechanzu is very important because, if you really understand Shechanzu, you become a great scholar in Buddhist literature, in Tibetan Buddhist literature. Because everything is there. So they translated the Shechanzu. And then now they're translating Dangwanzu. I had a little role to play there. Because one time there was a big translators conference in Colorado. And then they were discussing what should we translate now. They said we cannot think about Kanjur and Tenjur, that's too big. What else? So I thought, I said, what about Danganzu? Because Danganzu is what is called as the kind of main faith instructions or teachings of all the 8 practice lineages. The collection of all the main teachings of all 8 practice lineages that came to Tibet from India. And what is interesting was that, all these 8 practice lineages, the main instructions, main teachings of each of these, written by the main kind of most important teachers, they're not too long, but short, but essential teachings, instructions, sadhanas, empowerments, rituals, everything is there. But not long books with hundreds of pages, but like 20, 30, 40 pages, 50 pages, like that. And then it has everything of all the Tibetan Buddhists, 8 practice lineages: Kagyu, Yima, Sacha, Gelu, Kadam, Shije, Ju, everything. 18 volumes. So, but it is still 18 volumes, The 3 volumes of Shizhanzu became 10 volumes in English. And 18 volumes will become, I don't know how many volumes in translation. And I said it should be translated. And then, Sandra said, maybe we are interested. And then after some time say, no, we are not interested. Then I tried to inspire them a little bit. I said how important it is. And I said, I would like to contribute at least 1 month of my, time each year free. If you want to do this, I can try to help read the Tibetan and things like that. Then they said, we decided not to do it, but you come, we will discuss. So they gave me a ticket to come to America. I went there, and then we discussed for 7 days. And at the end they said, okay, we'll take it up. Now half of it is done. And I didn't spend any time. And just traveling around and enjoying myself. Anyway, so why I'm talking about this, I don't know. So this, and so many other translation projects are going on. And so therefore, I think it's really a golden age for the translations at this time. And when I read some of the translations of like 84,000 and other translations, I am really very happy. It makes me happy. Unlike that time. Those were, and yeah. And I also, I tell people, also translators, some of them also I've worked with. I said that I have studied some Tibetan. I consider myself not too bad in Tibetan language, I studied with very good teachers like Khenpo Tsendu and my own teacher, Khenpo Lama Rinche. They were great, not only great masters of everything, but very, very good in Tibetan language, grammar, poetry, everything. And I studied with them. And also I worked for 8 years in writing Tibetan textbooks and things like that. So I have some little pride of a little bit knowing Tibetan. Although my pride was totally crushed by the 17th Karmapa when he was very young. When at a certain time he asked me to come and translate the prayer book of Kagyu Malam. And then, I was reading that and half the things I didn't understand. When you are reading these prayers, you have almost by heart, But if you have to translate, you have to understand very deeply. And then you don't understand. So you get stuck, It happened many times. And then I would ask, what does this mean? And then he would say, oh, bring that volume of Kanjur or something like that. And then they bring that volume of Kanjur. Look here, it's explained here. It was very good for me, my pride. So anyway, I still say this, that if somebody, because sometimes the translators, their main problem is not in the very complicated and very, terms and, very deep philosophical things. Sometimes their main problem is very simple, normal things, like, a story, a very kind of simple story, and then they get stuck there because they don't understand the background or things like that. So then they don't understand. So in these cases, I can be very good help. So I also tell every great translators, small translators, newcomer translators, that if you come across some of these things, you can call me. I can help you. And I'm very happy to help because, that's the only thing I can do. I cannot translate big texts, it's too difficult, and my English is not as good to do that. But I can help this kind of things, So anyway, this kind of, so a translator has to be, I think this is what I wanted to say, was that you have to try to understand the source text thoroughly, and then try to improve your own language, kind of target language. Because the more better you are in target language, the better translation would be. If you are a poet, I think it would be very good, because then you can present it in a very, very, because that's what the poem is, no? Poems are something that really, you can say it in a simple, short way, but really touch the core of a person, Now maybe we need more of that, not just the explanations, but really inspiring. I don't know if maybe I don't know what you want to know about, or I just it's not, I think no use me blah blah too much. You have any questions? You have any special? Yeah.
Rinpoche, thank you for the great talk. I'm very curious about one specific translator, about your opinion about him, Herbert Gunter. You're familiar with Herbert Gunter, I assume.
Yes, yes.
Yes, so I hope it's not a too controversial question, but I'm very intrigued by many of his work. For example, like Ngaso, right, and resting in nature mind. And I remember one very specific word that was impressed upon me was, I think, Gompa Mepa, and he translate not as non-meditation like other translators, but as no more model making.
No,
No more model making. So it's very intriguing. So I wonder, how do you think about that kind of translation?
he was one of the pioneer, translators. He's one of the first, kind of translators. Um, I, 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 I saw him in Varanasi and staying around there for. I didn't speak to him because I was more like a child at that time, but yeah, I respect him a lot. But his translation, I mean, I tell you a story. in 1990, it's the first time I went to West. And I went to Brussels. And then they asked me to teach, this Gampopa's jewel ornament of liberation. And then I said, oh, yes, that's very good. I'll be very happy to do that. And then before going to the first class, some people coming to see me and things like that. One person came and said, why are you teaching this book? I said, this book is very essential. This book is very inspiring. This book is very simple. So that's why I said, no, it's not like that. It's the most boring book. I don't understand anything, It's very difficult. I said, no, it's not like that. So I went down to the, hall and tried to. So I had this Gunther's translation. So I was reading the Gunther's translation and I didn't understand. So I was not disrespecting Gunther, of course, but I was trying to kind of explain my own understanding of the Tibetan word, And then I came back, and then somebody came and knocked at my door. I said, what is it? He came in and says, how dare you dare to criticize Gunther? He is such a great translator and a great master and things like that. I said, I was not trying to criticize Gunther. I was not understanding this and tried to explain it. It's like that, His translations are, you can't say it's wrong. Of course, it's not wrong, but he uses words that's. Sometimes I feel more difficult than the Tibetan old, than in Tibetan, like sometimes, people use lots of Sanskrit words because that's the original. And then, of course, it's correct, but you can't understand. So the new words that he used are not only unfamiliar with us, like new kind of Tibetans who are kind of new to the English language, but most of the English-speaking people also don't really understand what's talking about. It's very philosophical. Maybe if you, this is one thing. Sometimes if you look at a word and go into this kind of the dictionary and deeper way of describing the word, then you find something there which is which actually may be the good translation of this word. But if you use that, then if the people don't understand that, then it doesn't serve too much purpose, no? But it is, it's difficult to say, So which is it better like that? That you introduce the word and then people slowly learn it? Like sometimes we use the original Sanskrit word, in the English, and that Sanskrit word slowly become English, That's what I wanted to actually say. The English language has another strength, that it is not very good to make new words, but it can adopt words from other languages much more easily. I think English language, many of these words are actually come from other languages, no? Greeks and Romans and, all different kind of other sources. So this is one good, very good thing. So, now already some of the, at least Sanskrit words, if not Tibetan too much, are already part of the, English vocabulary. So this is this like that. So, so the later translations, there it's more easy to understand. The Gunther's. Gunther was a very good. He was a pioneer. He's one of the first to translate the real Tibetan texts, things like that.
Rinpoche, thank you very much for wonderful presentation as always. I would like to ask you about your opinion about artificial intelligence and future of translation. Seems to be that AI doing such a tremendous progress. There is such a tremendous investment in the scaling AI ability. And how do you think? Because sometimes some people say that maybe translators will be not needed. All this, Tibetan, even Sanskrit fashion uploaded will be translated in beautiful language because it seems to be much easier to, let's say, teach AI than the humans. What is your opinion, Rinpoche? Thank you.
Well, opinion is, there is no opinion, but it's true. It's very amazing. It's very shocking, actually. The things they can do, and that's I was looking at one of them. I mean, maybe there are many different things like that. You can ask a question, and it will just answer to. How do I meditate? It gives you such a nice instruction that it's like better than most of the meditation teachers, like this. And then anything you ask, they give you answer. And if there's a little bit complicated, they say, no, I'm not a human being. They say. So it's it's like that. And now it's people are doing operations, through through this kind of magic machine, and so so maybe all of us can just go and go on holiday and then put this AI to work, and they will do everything. Uh, I don't know, but last year I was in Australia, and very first time, it must be other places also. I went to a restaurant, and then it was a machine, a small kind of who comes, and then you can you can see the menu on your telephone, and then you can order, and then the machine that goes and then brings all the food and brings to your to your table. There's nobody, it doesn't serve you. If there are 4 people, all the orders will come, but it doesn't put it on you have to bring it to your own. It's really like that. So yeah. I don't know whether it's true or not, but I heard that they were making this, I don't know, some company was making this, machines. And then they suddenly found that the machines were talking to each other. And they were talking to each other in a language that nobody knew. So the people who were doing that got a little scared, and they they abandoned the project.
Thank you, Rinpoche, for wonderful talk. I have a couple of questions. The first question is here in the Master on Translation that in Ranjung Institute, some of us, we are doing a Master in Translation. And then one of the things that I've noticed in our translation classes is that certainly our translations are much better when we are working in group, when we're in like a team. So then everyone is bringing their translations, and definitely everyone has some mistakes and something that we didn't get. And then it kind of gets very obvious for me that teamwork is really necessary in a translation work. So yeah, I mean, you already somehow mentioned that, but yeah, I was wondering whether you can maybe give some insights on like the importance of teamwork in the translation and how we need to encourage this kind of teamwork in the different translations.
Yeah, I think it's much better. It's much better, but the problem is that people working together, no. As I told you, that time when we translated this Kagyu book, Karmapa told me and one other Canadian translator to come, but it's a big book like this, so I thought it'll take years. And then I tried to get some people to help me, and then went there. And then the other translator already come there. And then he was so quick. He had already translated like 1/4 of the book. And then he told me that, do you want to translate some parts yourself? Or we go together through all the translations that I said we go together. And we went together, and then I criticize everything that he says. And we were debating and debating and debating and discussing and discussing. And sometimes Karmapa would come and he would come fed up because this is the way they must have done in the olden days, So he was sometimes very frustrated because he used to do alone himself, But at the end, when we completed, he said, I don't know now, how can I translate myself alone? It was so it's a little bit, it's much because when you just do it, then you do it. But then when somebody says something and raise a question and things like that, and then you have to think again, and so certainly two heads is better than one. I think it's very, very important because in the olden days, in the Tibet, when Tibetan texts were translated from Sanskrit, there was always an Indian Pandit, and there was a Tibetan translator, Lopen, Lotsawa, and Pandita, they call them. Pandita is the English, the Indian master, and Lotsawa is the Tibetan. And Lotsawa would know both languages. And Pandita would know definitely very good the Sanskrit, but some of them knew a little bit of Tibetan also, I think. And then they worked together and they translated. And then Shuchen, it was given to a Xiuchen. Xiuchen is like a great editor, so then the editor would go through it and things like that. So, and sometimes it was re-edited a few times and things like that. So this is, I think, is very good, because then, it's recently I also did, like for the 84,000, we did a small text. I thought for a long time that I should at least contribute something to the Kanjur in English. And then I was trying to set up a committee, a small group, but was not able to, because everybody was busy and things like that. And recently we did one, and there's me. Then there's another nun whose Tibetan is very good. The English also good. She is a Westerner. And then there's another American scholar, PhD holder, professor, whose Tibetan is also okay, but English very good. So we worked together. First I translated verbally, and then the nun translated it nicely, and then this the professor, she completely edited it, and then it reads quite better. It reads quite well. So things like that, I think people working together is much, is much better. Yes.
Thank you. What you were talking about earlier, how the prayers or sadhanas often in English often don't like touch your heart. I wonder if it has something to do with the metrical or like musical component. And I've like heard some people in English do the chanting and like do the Buddha, Dharma, like that kind of thing. But I guess my question is, do you think there's room or a need or a possibility for masters to make original compositions in English and like to do kind of new sadhanas or new prayers that are coming out of English meter and rhyme and original opposed to a translation? Yeah.
Yeah, this some people are trying that, like they're trying to translate in kind of same metrics like Tibetan, so that you can chant in the Tibetan tune. Sometimes it is maybe okay, but I don't mean that. It's not necessarily the meters, but it is the way you say it. Like I think it's meter doesn't matter too much, but sometimes you say in a certain way, and you really, it's really inspiring. And the same thing, you can say it in such a way that it doesn't feel anything, and that is must be, it's a talent, no? It's a talent. You can say the same thing in one way and same thing in another way, So there, I think, especially like sadhanas and prayers, because these sadhanas, prayers are something that you say again and again, because it really has to, touch you. And if it doesn't touch you or move you, then it becomes not so useful, no? So that's, that's, I hope some very good translators come up within this young group who can do that, because there are lots of, there are nice, very kind of inspiring things in English also, or any language, of course. It's a language is not a problem. How you do it is the problem.
Okay. I mean, just sometimes when we translated when we translate from Tibetan to different languages, and because of each language have its own characteristics, and maybe sometimes when we compare Tibetan to English, it is okay, and Tibetan to another language, it is also okay. But when we compare these two target language, maybe
What?
to these two target language.
Target language?
Yes. For example, just the sutra in English and also sutra in Spanish. And in this case, it will be some kind of difference of these sutras. So do we need to avoid this circumstance somehow?
I mean, I think it's like this, the of course, when you translate into different language, you have to, you have to take into consideration of the, the readers, how they understand and things like that, using words which, sometimes there are many different words for one word, and some words fit more than the others and things like that. And, sometimes a little bit, whether all the words are there or not. Sometimes, you can have lots of words, but not much meaning. And sometimes, you don't need to use all the words. That's in the track, in the original, but you can say it in a certain way that actually it means the same thing. So, of course, I think it will be slightly different, maybe, but if it gives the same meaning, then it is okay. And also, I think it is also important that, sometimes there are also things like, when you translate, you have to take into account of what you are saying and how it affects the people and understanding, because if you just translate literally all the words, sometimes it can be misunderstood also, the words are there, but, when you read them, it might mean totally kind of, it gives the different understanding, So there are lots of things like that into consideration. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.